Hey y'all, welcome to my home office in Charleston, South Carolina. Thanks so much for taking my class as part of the summer workshop retreat. I've maxed this out at the full 50 minutes I was allotted, so I'm going to leave you with this quick hello and we'll get right to the lesson and tutorial. I hope you enjoy my class. Welcome to my class on creating mixed lettering. This is one of my favorite styles to create, so I'm really excited to share with you some tips for how I create in this style. I'm going to give you 10 tips that I typically use when I'm creating a piece like this, plus we'll go through a quick lesson on serif styles because that will be the focus of our class project together today. If you love this lettering style and you enjoy this class, I hope that you'll pop over and say hello to me on Instagram. You can find me at @ByDawnNicole. Now I'm going to move through the slides pretty fast today because we want to leave plenty of time to do our class project together in Procreate, so feel free to reach out to me after this class if you have any questions. So tip number 1, we are going to mix together different type classifications. This is the heart of this style. The main types we'll focus on in this lesson are sans serif, serif, and script. So this is a sans serif font. It is very basic, simple, and clean. This is a serif font. It's a little more decorative and it's known for what they call feet at the ends of each letter stroke. And this is a script font. In the out of office lettering piece on your screen, you can see that I've used all 3 types of these in my lettering piece. Tip number 2 is to vary the size of each letter or word. So the piece that I've shown as an example is a bigger piece, so I varied the size of each word versus each letter. When you do this with intention, it's a super easy and effective way to create a mixed style. So for this piece, I actually styled a photo on my kitchen table, and then I moved the photo to Procreate and added the lettering right in Procreate. Tip number 3 is to vary the color of each letter. This is not a revolutionary tip. You don't want to use this vary the color of each letter tip on its own. You're going to combine it with some of the other tips we're going through. So in this example piece, I've used a different color for each letter, but I've also used different type classifications. I've used some inline dots and different things to give it an overall kind of doodly and whimsical feel. Tip number 4 is to vary the weight of each letter or word. So when we talk about weights, we're talking about whether it is a monoline or a bold, or it has a calligraphic where we have the thin upstrokes and thick downstrokes. So in the bottom right corner of your screen, you can see how I've done some examples of these for you. And you can see how I use that in this piece I did. This was not done for Alo Yoga. It was a just for fun piece, but I had a lot of fun putting it together, and it represents the type of work I'd love to do for brands. Tip number 5 is to add different styles of inline decorative elements on each letter or word. So in this sum gave all piece, I've used dots on some and stars on some in the center of the letters. So I only used 2 in this piece, but you could use a different style on every single letter if you wanted to. In these examples, I've used, I don't know exactly how many, but somewhere between 8 and 10 lettering fills, or you could call them inline decorations. And these pieces, I kept it to all one lettering style. So it's just a bold sans serif, all caps, very simple. But with the way I've varied the color and the inline styles, it still gives them a mixed up doodly feel. I threw this in the slideshow more to show you how you can use a bunch of different types of lettering decorations to give it a doodly feel. Tip number 6 is to add shadows to only some of your letters. So this is an old version of my logo from years ago, but I threw it in to show you how I had done a shadow just on the D, the N, and the O. Tip number 6 is that you could, this is tip number 6 continued actually, you can make the shadows go in varied directions. So on this Awake-ish piece, which is what we are creating together in our class project, I've got shadows going in a lot of different directions. Typically, you wouldn't see that done in one lettering piece, but with mixed lettering, we really want to give it a funky and fun vibe. So this is a logo I did for my second blog, which focuses on my house and life in Charleston. And In this example, in this tip, we are going to mix lowercase and capital letters together in an unconventional way. So even though this piece has a consistent color, a consistent lettering style, and a consistent letter weight, I did a calligraphic thick and thin style, it still gives it a doodly mixed lettering feel because I've distinctively mixed capitals and lowercases in a non-traditional way. Tip number 8 is to change the angle or slant of each letter. So on this piece I did for the dream box, you can see that when you're doing calligraphy, for example, all your slant should be at a roughly 45-degree angle, and you want to keep that very consistent. When we do mixed lettering, we're gonna make our angle go all over the place to give us that nice, fun look, and that's usually a lettering don't, but we're gonna break this rule a lot in mixed lettering. Tip number 9 is to start simple. So after this class, if you find it overwhelming, all these tips, take one letter, pick any letter you want and draw it 10 to 20 ways, and then put them all on one page like I've done here, and it'll see how you can instantly get kind of a mixed lettering feel. And after you've done something simple, you can progress to longer words and phrases and maybe do something like these two pieces, which I did using song lyrics. So the final tip, I've got the Awake-ish piece up again because it's a good example of adding a different style of serif to each letter. So this is what we're going to focus on in today's class project. But before we get to that, here's a super quick little overview of serif styles. So this is a very non-comprehensive list. You can use Google and books to learn more about these, as well as what they call terminals. There are ball terminals, there's teardrop terminals, and I do incorporate those a lot into my lettering. So when you see a serif font, it will have usually one of these styles of feet, and then on certain letters, they'll add a terminal, which just kind of softens the overall look and adds a little more style. So when you are done with this class and this project, I would love for you to go and study some serif fonts. So study a wide variety and see what you are drawn to, what you would like to use in your own lettering. And I want you to pay special attention to where the serifs are placed, especially on commonly misdrawn letters such as C, N, S, and W. So at the bottom here, I've picked just a few of my favorite serif fonts and also included Times New Roman just because it's so classic. And you can see I've highlighted those letters at the bottom. So these serifs might be somewhere that you wouldn't intuitively guess that they would go. So really study those fonts to learn the proper place to place your serifs, because that's one place I do try not to break the rules too much with this style of lettering. Okay, so now that we've gone through this, let's get into our fun with Procreate. So this is what we will be making together today. All you really need is your iPad, your Apple Pencil, the Procreate app, and a basic monoline brush. I will also be using some brushes from my creativity kit, which Peggy had linked for you all. So you can use that, but you don't necessarily have to have it to follow along. As long as you have a basic monoline brush, you will be able to do the basic parts of this tutorial. So I just wanted to kind of show you that is what our basic lettering will look like when we get done. And then we'll add the shadows going in different directions. We'll add some letter details and some background detail so that your piece will really pop. The very first step is to do your sketching. So we only have 30 minutes together today. We can't go through that entire process, but that, I feel like it's important for you to know, this process of just getting my sketch and letters arranged took me about 2 full hours. And that's because I trade in and out a lot of letters, and it's kind of like putting a puzzle together to get letters that you think look nice together, deciding which are capitals, deciding which are going to be lowercase, deciding which letters will have which kind of serif, and we'll adjust the angles and things like that as we go. But the first step is sketching, and it should take you a decent amount of time. So I don't want you to ever look at a piece and think that you should be getting these full pieces done in half an hour. That's just not typically the case, even for a simple piece like this. So first we're gonna walk through drawing each letter because it each has a different serif, and then we'll move a little faster when we get to the shadows and adding the details, because if I show you on one letter, then you'll really know how to get through the other letters on your own. So our first letter is a capital letter A, and we are putting a nice thick slab serif on that. So Above my sketch layer, I will usually add a new layer and tap to rename that letter A. And that just helps keep me nice and organized because I do use a whole lot of layers when I do a piece like this. So now I'm gonna grab my monoline brush and adjust the size so it's fairly small. And then I'm just gonna come over here and basically trace my sketch. So I will draw a line, and if you hold your Apple Pencil down, you get a nice perfectly straight line. And I want that to be at the same angle for the other side of that. So what I'll do a lot of times is swipe left on my layer and duplicate, then grab my arrow and just slide that on over. Now I'm going to swipe left and duplicate again, and then I'm going to flip it horizontal, adjust the angle with the little green dot here, and slide that right into place. And then once again, I will duplicate, and that one's a little too short, but that's okay. We can add to it manually. So let's tap that into place just a little better. If you need to zoom in, you can 2-finger zoom in and then just tap it. And my angle is a tiny bit off. Okay. So for that one, I would just zoom in and go ahead and finish that line out. All right, so now we can merge all those layers together, and we're just going to pinch them into one layer. So now I can go ahead and do my crossbar here. So I'll add one line and then another line, again, holding my pencil so I get that nice straight line. And then what I like to do for my serifs so that they're the same size, you could actually even do them a different size since we're going for a very mixed up look. I'll usually add a new layer so that I can create that slab serif. And then I'm gonna duplicate it for the other side. So draw that in, and then if you need to erase anything you overshot a little, you can erase. So now I'm just going to, again, swipe left and duplicate that, and then slide it into place. And then I need one at the top, so I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate that one more time. And you can see that's a little bigger. So all we need to do is grab the arrow tool, and instead of uniform, you wanna tap freeform and just shorten that a bit. Actually, yep, there we go. And then that overshoots that a little, so I'll just erase that out. And now again, I can merge all those into one layer, and then I can just drag and drop and color everything in. I usually start in black for everything, and then I add color after I'm finished with all my letters. All right, let's move on to letter W. So once again, we will add a new layer, tap it, and rename to W. So this time we have a Tuscan serif, and we have some thick downstrokes and thinner upstrokes, so a slightly calligraphic style of letters. So again, I am going to make that, with my brush selected, that nice thin line, and then I will swipe left and duplicate. And first I'm gonna bring that all the way over to this other side here. And then I am going to duplicate once again, bring that there, go ahead and erase, make my eraser a little bigger here. Erase that down a little, and then again, swipe left, duplicate, and bring that over there. And that just helps keep your angle consistent. So you can go ahead and merge all those down, and then we'll do another new layer. And for this one, I'll grab my brush tool. You can 2-finger tap to undo. It's a feature I use all the time. All right, and again, swipe left, duplicate, bring that to the other side, erasing out any extra if you need to. One more time, duplicate, and then erase. I forgot to erase on my last one. And then I'm gonna go ahead and merge all of that down, pinch it together. And then you can see right here, it didn't quite get those connected, so I can just manually go in and make sure those lines are connected. That's important when we go to color it in, otherwise it won't fill your letter appropriately. It'll fill your whole page. All right, so now all we have to do is add our Tuscan serif. And again, we want them to be consistent, so I'm gonna add a new layer. And what I like to do for this one is, if you draw an arc and hold it, it'll do the same thing as your line, but with an arc. So I do that once, and then I swipe left and duplicate, bring it down. So go ahead and merge those two down by tapping on the top layer and click merge down, then connect them. All right, so again, we've got that done. So we're gonna swipe left and duplicate. We're gonna click our arrow tool, and then we're going to click flip horizontal, make sure we're on uniform. And now I'm just gonna slide that into place and adjust the angle to where I want it. And now I've got a nice, even Tuscan serif. So I'll merge that down. And now I want 3 of those. So I'm gonna duplicate and put that one in place. Actually, let me do this one first. And if you wanna adjust the angle just a little, so it's not super duper perfect, you can do that. I do that sometimes. And then for this one, sometimes it doesn't fit quite well. So all I do is freeform and just shrink it a little. And that kind of breaks some rules too, but no one's ever really probably going to notice. So that's how I do it. So we're done with letter W. We'll go ahead and pinch that all into one layer, fill it in. Because I have so many lines, the filling in process is a little slower, but you can, when you are coloring in, if it's not filling in your whole thing like you want it to, what you can do is adjust the color drop threshold. You can see it changing at the top here just by holding your pen to the page, and it will remember that for the next time. So you usually have it pretty high when you're filling something like this. So that is our W, and now we will move on to the lowercase a. So our A has a calligraphic style as well. We've got thin and thick strokes. We've got a hairline serif down here, but then up here I chose to do a teardrop terminal. So I'll add a new layer, rename. I'm gonna make that a lowercase a, again, to keep things organized. And if you would prefer that the letters be in order, all you have to do is tap and hold the layer and drag and drop it to get it to where you wanna go. So for the letter A, there's not a lot of duplicating we can do like we did in the last 2 letters. So for this one, I really just kind of do my best to make a nice straight-ish line. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect because the overall style of our lettering is not perfect. And sometimes what I'll do is draw my curve, let the arc create, and then attach it with a nice straight line here like that, so that I can let Procreate do some of the work and help me out. And then just kind of I like my lowercase a's when they're done in this old-fashioned style like this to be really swoopy down there, and you should have a nice little triangle you could theoretically draw right there. And then we're just gonna add our teardrop terminal. And connect that like that. And then I want my hairline serif to be just a little bigger, so I'll increase my brush size and then just draw a nice straight line. A lot of times what I'll do is overshoot like that and then come in and erase it so you can get a nice sharp corner. And then fill it in. And you can see sometimes there's little imperfections because of the way you sketch the letter. So all I do after I'm done is kind of come in, and if there's an arc I'm unhappy with, I'll just kind of touch it up manually like that. So there is our letter A, and we'll move on next to one of my least favorite letters to draw, the letter K. All right, so let's add a new layer. I'll hold and drag it to the bottom just so we keep things consistent. I will tap and rename it letter K. And this one is a Gothic serif at the top, and then I just did a single one at the bottom. There's a double at the top, and then those I just kind of swooped. This is a lettering style I taught in my Quinn workbook, and I teach the full alphabet, all caps and all lowercase. It's in the shop, which you can find through my blog. It's just shop.bydonnicole.com if you wanted to learn this entire alphabet. And that book is for iPad and paper lettering, so it's not necessarily just on Procreate. So the first thing I usually do is start by making, actually I'm gonna thin my brush just a little. I'm gonna make a nice arc on one side and hold it so my arc is created. And then these arcs are intentionally a little different. So I'll make my second arc and it's just a little smaller and shorter down. So with the letter K, at least when it's drawn like this, I can often make a nice straight line and then kind of come in and manually draw an arc. And that just kind of helps make it easier on yourself instead of trying to draw that entire arc and line together. And we'll do like we did with the A, we can come back and edit it if we need to later. So sometimes I'll try and see like if it auto makes the arc, if it works well enough. If it doesn't, I'll manually do it. In this case, it works pretty well, so I use that. And then I'll connect that. And then you can see that's a little uneven, so I'm just gonna go ahead and touch that up a little right now. Now for a letter K, what you ideally wanna have your leg of it coming kind of diagonal from there. So when you're drawing it from scratch, that's just something to keep in mind. So if there's a letter you hate drawing like I do, it's a good idea to try to draw it even more so that you start to get a little more comfortable with it. I don't hate drawing it quite as much as I used to years ago. It's still not one of my favorites. I feel like it always looks a little funky, but I actually really like this one. Okay, so we'll come in with our leg there. And then once again, we will just drag and drop our color. And once you drag and drop the color, it's a little easier to see where you need to touch up. Like, I don't necessarily like how that arc came out. So again, I'll just go in and smooth it out a bit. And because we have everything on our own layer, on its own layer, it's a lot easier to edit and move your letters around later. So I use a ton of layers when I work. Now we're gonna do a lowercase letter E, this time with a ball terminal. So how I usually draw this one, I'll add a new layer, rename, make it a lowercase e here. So I usually start here, keep forgetting to put my brush on after I've used my eraser. And I'll draw a straight line there. And then I'll draw a straight line above it. And then again, you can play with the arc and see if it makes an arc that you like. You can go ahead and use that. And then this one will be a little more sketchy, and then we'll go back and edit it because I really like to use the arcs because that gives me a nice smooth line. I really love lettering on the iPad because I kind of have shaky hands by nature. So on paper, I really struggle with getting nice straight lines. And I've always been someone who, like before the iPad, I didn't really like lettering digitally. I would just draw on paper and then edit everything in Adobe Illustrator. So there's no shame in working with your strengths. And if something doesn't work for you, there's no shame in taking advantage of, see, if I try the arc there, it doesn't work very well. So I do that from scratch, but I do like to do this all in one shot because then this part is nice and even. So I'll do my best there. And then for the ball part, what I like to do is add a new layer. So I'll draw a circle, let it, and then if you tap your finger, it makes a super perfect circle. So I will do that and then drag and drop, and then I can kind of slide that into place and then merge down. I'll fill my letter, and that makes it a lot easier, as I've mentioned in the other letters, to go in and smooth things out. You can erase anything you need to erase, and this came out really wonky, so I'll come in and smooth that out. And then sometimes you can go ahead and use those arcs when you're smoothing. The thing is, in our own work, we notice the imperfections so much more than you do in anyone else's. I've been lettering for 8 years, and now I've learned to, on the people who I really admire and I feel like are, you know, lettering goals, if you look really closely at their work, nothing is perfect. And that's part of the charm of hand lettering. I feel like I don't want it to look too perfect. Otherwise, I would just use a font. The charm for me of hand lettering are all those little nuances and imperfections that are created when anything is done by hand. So embrace that and learn to love it in your own work. So now we're gonna do a parentheses, and you will love this because it's so nice and easy. So I'm gonna rename this with a parenthesis on the left. And so all I do for these is use that arc to my advantage by putting my pencil down, drawing an arc, and then holding at the bottom to get a nice arc. That one didn't come out so well, so I'll 2-finger tap to undo and then bring it down. That worked well. All right, now all I have to do is drag and drop my color. And now let's add another new layer, tap to rename. We're gonna do our lowercase I. So this was another version of the Quinn style that I was talking about with the letter K, but I've altered it a bit so that I have the Gothic Serif on the top and the bottom so that it's not quite the same as our letter K, but it still creates a sense of balance and cohesiveness to our overall piece. So for this one, again, you can, and when you draw a letter I, the top, they call it a tittle, it should be just a little bigger than the width of your letter I. So we'll draw that. And then for this, I usually do the same thing as I did with the letter K. So I'll start with my 2 straight lines, use the arc tool to my advantage on both sides, and then connect them manually. And then again, on this side. This is one of my favorite styles of serif. I love it. Oop, 2-finger tap to undo that dot. And that is our letter I. Now let's go ahead and do our letter S. We're gonna add a new layer as per usual. And for this one, what we do is we wanna make our monoline brush nice and large. I'm gonna do a test here, make it even larger. And S is a tricky letter to draw. It's kind of like you want 2 arcs like that. Whoop. And then you're gonna connect them in the middle. So you could draw it like that. I try to do it all in one shot, but that's what you're going for your letter S shape. All right. I'm gonna give it one more try. Okay, and then I'm gonna do my serifs on a new layer just because I wanna be able to alter the angle if I need to. So I'll draw and hold, and again, draw and hold. And that looks pretty good. Actually, I'm gonna tap that one. Oops, I did that on its own layer. So if that happens, if you do both, if you meant to do each on their own layer and you did both on one layer, all you have to do is grab this little ribbon looking tool up here and you can circle it, and then you can just tap it into place a little. So let's go ahead and merge that down, and then we're gonna go in and smooth out this connection here with our eraser and just make that nice and smooth. Now this is a monoline, so we wanna try to keep it all the same width, but you can just eyeball it and that will be fine. So there is our letter S. Letter H too, because we can do some duplicating again. So we will add a new layer, rename it to H, and oops, got it way too big still. All right, so draw one line, swipe left and duplicate. Then I'm going to merge those together by pinching the layers together. And then I'm gonna swipe left and duplicate and put that on the other side. Now you could do just for the serifs on this one, we've got a hairline serif, but I've curved it. So I'm gonna increase my brush size a little. So you could either draw all of them manually, or you can draw one, and you guessed it, we're just gonna swipe left, duplicate, and then actually merge that down, swipe left, duplicate, bring those to the bottom, and then merge everything together. So we can color that in. And then when I'm doing a curved line like this, I like to turn my page so that I can pull it towards me. I feel like I can get it a little smoother that way. And so we'll add in that. And then you're just going to go ahead and repeat the parentheses on the other side. So of course you could have duplicated your parentheses and moved it to that side. However, I like to do them separately so they each have a slightly different look. And then we have all these little details, and I do usually like to add them at this point just so it gives me a rough idea of placement. I use stamps for these, but you could use, you could just draw them in as well. So a lot of times I will use stamps. You can see in my creativity kit, I've got all these different artsy markers and then also stamps, and we'll use those again for the decorative details. I actually think for that exact heart, I used one from my folk art kit, but you can totally just draw in that heart. I'm gonna use a stamp just because I use stamps a ton in my work because they just are a huge time saver. So I usually just stamp it down, and this one I wanted it to be thinner, so all I did was freeform it and make it a little smaller. And I usually do all of this on one side, everything on its own layer. I'm not gonna rename it quite yet. And then I'll go back to my creativity kit, and I did a stamp there, and then I circle it with that ribbon tool and adjust the angle. And then for the next one, I did a little stamped circle and then a stamped dot, make that a little bigger. And then I did a star, make that a little bigger as well. And you can see these are designed to be artsy and have some opacity to them. So if you want them to be darker, all you have to do is swipe left and duplicate your layer. And if you can see, that gets darker and makes it more, more opaque. So I will merge that down, and if I want it to be even darker, I'll repeat that one more time. And now I'm gonna make this my letter, we'll just call this details. And I want that on the other side as well. So I'll swipe left, duplicate, click my arrow tool, and then click flip horizontal and put it on the other side as well. And again, I wanna leave that on its own layer so it's easy for me to edit later. And I merge those down since they're separate, and it's pretty easy to go ahead and grab one side if I want to. I'm just gonna keep them on their own layer for the sake of having a few less layers. So now we'll get started with the fun part and starting to add some color in the shadows. And this part will move a little faster than going through each letter like we've done so far. All right, so my style is decidedly feminine and girly, but you could make it, of course, less girly by doing different color scheme, by maybe replacing the heart with something else. If you're not into the heart, you could use just stars. Make it your own if you would like it to feel less feminine, but I am pretty darn girly with my style. I used a color palette I created here. I'm gonna go ahead and put this color palette as a free download on my blog, so you can go grab it if you wanna use the exact same one. I use this one a lot, I really love it. But today you can use anything you want. I'm gonna start with this kind of light purple on the letter A and just drag and drop it. And if it didn't fill nicely, that's okay. Let me show you an example of what it might look like if your color drop threshold is too low. Okay, so if your color drop threshold is too low, you get these little edges where it doesn't fill in. So all you have to do to fix that is drag and drop and then increase your color threshold by a bunch. And then it will give you, whoop, a nice fill all the way to the edges of your letter. And what you're seeing in the background is sometimes the sketch. So we'll go ahead and turn our sketch off, and then you can see you've got a nice clean letter. So now we want to add our shadow to that layer. So the first thing we want to do is swipe left, duplicate, and we're going to change our bottom layer, but I'm going to start with the top one just to show you the color change. So first thing we want to do is use a slightly darker color. So you're going to make your purple darker. What I usually do when I'm doing this, let's say I start with this purple, I'll go to the classic one right here and then just slide that so it gets a little bit darker. I did all that when I was working on it, so I'm just gonna stick with my color palette here, and you can see that the color changed, and that is our shadow. So we're gonna drag it to the bottom. Now there are ways to make quicker drop shadows. When I do a piece like this, I usually do it all manually. It's a little more time consuming, but it's also a little more precise. So for this one, I'll show you how I do it manually. For the next one, I'll show you the quick method. So I'm gonna take that, and I want this shadow to be down here on the left a little. So just drag it into place. And then you are going to grab your monoline brush again. Any monoline brush will do. And all we're gonna do is connect the ends. So for this, we want to connect it here and then just color that in. This will get connected there. This will get connected there. So just go through and connect everything. And then later in this process, we'll add some extra shadows to make it pop even more. So that's it for adding that. So for letter W, let's talk about how we can do this more quickly. So you can duplicate your letter again, and then grab your bottom, make sure you're working on your bottom. Actually, let's go ahead and add some color to that letter. So I'm gonna make the main part pink, and then the bottom one, I'm gonna make a darker pink. You can't see it because it's on the bottom, but on that bottom layer, I'm gonna come over here to this little magic wand looking tool, and I'm gonna click motion blur and layer. Now I want the shadow this time to come to this angle towards my bottom right. So I'm gonna tap my pencil to the page and then make motion blur. And you can see the number changing at the top and this starting to grow. So I don't want it to be too big, but let's try maybe a 19. And then you can kind of slide that into place. And it's too see-through, so we want to, there's two ways you can do this to make it more opaque. So you can click select, fill layer, select, fill layer repeatedly. You could also duplicate it a few times and merge it down, and then it gets thicker. So you do that until you're happy with it, and then tap it into place. And you can see the same thing is accomplished much more quickly, but it's not always quite as precise. And if you had any stray marks on your page, you see that little line? That means like I had a tiny dot on my original layer here, and it turns that into a shadow too. So you just have to go erase that out. So you can do either way. They both, when I am working on a big piece, I usually use that quick method. When I am working on a piece like this, I usually do it manually. I find it kind of fun, and I can kind of just zone out and work on it, and I'll usually have Netflix in the background. So all we're gonna do now, I'm gonna speed up this next part of the video and you can watch me do it at a hyperlapse pace. We are going to go through and do the same thing repeatedly, and you can see I alternated. So my shadow went this way and then it went this way. My shadow went this way and then it went this way. This one went that way. You can kind of play with whatever you want to do, but I never did two of the same shadow in a row. So I want you to go through and add all your shadows, only because we're on a time constraint. I'm not going to walk you through each one. It's also a little boring to keep doing the same thing over and over again for you guys, I feel like. So go through and finish that, and then we'll pick back up with adding the shadow details on our drop shadow, and also doing our inline letter details and our background detail. Now we have all our shadows in. I realize if you're watching this live, you probably can't pause and do that, but if you got the package where you can come back to it, you would pause there, come back to it, or just do this after you watch the video, because I don't want to go over my allotted class time. So I've got all those in, and I usually wait to do the color on these till the very end so I can kind of decide, oh, there's only one yellow here. I need some more yellow to balance this piece, so I'm gonna put yellow on this heart. So I wait till the end to do that. So the last thing I do for the shadows, we're gonna use the letter A. And again, I'm gonna walk you through it once and then let you figure out the other ones on your own. So I add a darker color to make it really pop. So what I usually do, you could use a clipping mask, but what I usually do for these is just turn on alpha lock. So you tap your layer and you click alpha lock. And all that means is I can only color on the letter I've drawn right there. So I'm gonna use an even darker purple for that. So again, I'll click my dark purple, I'll come to classic, and I'll just make it a tiny bit darker. So if I didn't have alpha lock on, what happens is I can color everywhere. If I turn alpha lock on, I can only color on the letter, and that's what we want. So when you think about where the sun is, usually the bottom of letters and underneath of shadows are where it's even darker. So all I do is, so you want to connect that in there and then make the bottom a darker shade of purple, and that makes the 3D effect pop even more. This is an optional step. You don't necessarily have to do it. I usually end up doing it on the bottom of that A. It would be right there, and you would leave that color. There's usually like a little there, and then it would be the bottom there. Sometimes it gets a little tricky in your head to think about it, but you can study examples online. You can look at my final example. When I do the color palette on the blog, I'll put a final example of this so you could print it out if you wanted as a reference sheet. So go through and do that on all your shadows, and then we'll add the final details. All my little shadows added. So on curved ones, one thing I wanted to note, you can see here, I usually use a gradient brush to kind of soften that hard line. You could also leave a hard line, but I generally prefer to smooth it out. So what that might look like here, if I am doing a hard line here, I would use this basic monoline, and you've got that hard line. And then I would use, you can use anything artsy that kind of has a gradient style. You probably have something in your collection. And then I just kind of smooth it out so it's a little more of a subtle blend. So let's add our background next. So what I usually do here is add a new layer at the bottom. I'll rename this background. And you can see I lost all my letter names because this is an earlier version of my piece where I had done all the shadows already. But normally I do like to keep every layer labeled so I can keep it all organized. So in the creativity kit, I used this soft pastel brush right here, and that's what I did for my background because it's got a really fun texture to it. And then I used a really light blue. I made it a big size and then very imperfectly drew just kind of a blob behind my lettering. And this just kind of helps it to pop in just a super simple way to add interest. All right, and it's really light. So what I wanted to do is make it a little bolder. So what I did for that is I swipe left and duplicated, and that makes it a little bolder, but I also wanted to make it a little smaller. So I made it a little smaller and then centered it again. And then I did that one more time and centered it again. And then it's a little more gradual. And if you zoom in, you can see, it might be hard to see on screen, you have kind of fading layers that get more bold as you get to the center. And then again, I just merged those by pinching them down into one layer. Now we want to add the inline details. So I come up here and add a new layer. Oop. And I rename that Inline Details. And for this, you could manually, this is what it looks like. We're adding in dots and stars. And again, you could do a different one on each piece. With the Wakeish theme, I felt like stars made sense, and then dots are always a good choice. So I designed in my creativity kit these little border brushes. You can use them for borders, or you could use them for inline details. So sometimes I'll use them as like a border to go around my piece. And then sometimes I will use them most often as inline details. And it just saves me a lot of time from sitting there and dotting everything. And I also like the contrast of the different sizes. It's a really doodly feel. So again, you can use these as a straight line by holding it. And you can adjust the size from letter to letter. So for letter A, I had done dots, and you can even do that and then manually add one at the end if you feel like it fits better. And across the middle here. The slower you go, usually the more control you have over this. And then I use the star one for every other letter. So I used, whoop, way too big. So this just makes it really easy and saves you a lot of time. You can go through in no time at all and add all this inline details to all your letters. Then I made it a little smaller to do the top. And then again, you're just gonna go through dots, stars, dots, stars, dots, stars. When I got to the letter I decided to make just one big star in the middle. And you can always stamp it down. And if you wanna adjust it using this little ribbon tool, you can circle it and then adjust it as you wish. I usually keep it uniform and then make it a little bigger. So go through and do all that. And then all we have to do is decide on colors for our little details down here. All right, final step. So now we're just going to add some color to those. So again, tap your layer, and we've actually already got alpha lock on, but if it wasn't on, you would tap it and click alpha lock. So now we just wanna add some color. So I'm gonna use a monoline brush and make it pretty big so it's easy to color. And then, like I said, I think about where I need to add some balance in my piece. So there's a yellow here, so I really wanna add some yellow over here. And that pink was only used once, so I wanna use that over here. And that kind of gives me the basis, and that instantly creates a little more balance in my piece. And then just to make it a little more fun, I used the shadow of each one, and I drew a line straight down the middle and made my hearts a little more two-tone here. Same thing with the bottom. So if you don't have your color tool or your color palette, one thing you can do is use this square and tap it, and then just go back and quickly grab that color to change out. And then I used bright pink here. I decided to use this dark teal here. Since these are finer details, you do probably need to use some of the darker colors to really make them stand out. And then I used this dark blue for the star. Same over here. I used kind of a teal color here. And again, this is totally up to you. This is just kind of my process for deciding how I balance out my piece. I added one more yellow here since there's not a yellow in the piece, not a lot of yellow, and a purple there. And then that is our whole piece. So you can use that in bigger pieces and add illustrations. Like maybe I could have drawn a little coffee at the bottom here, but I felt like for the purposes of this class, I'd given you enough, but I'll show you an example that I kind of showed you in the slideshow. Like this one, for example, I added a rainbow up here, and I added the mermaid fin and some drops. And then I colored all of these using mostly the crayon brush and the soft pastel brush to give it a little more of an artsy feel. So that's it, we're all done. Thank you so much for attending today and following along with me. I hope you had fun learning about the mixed lettering style and different kinds of serifs and how you can change the style and really make it your own.